This is The High Road with author and registered psychotherapist, Dr. Marlene Bizub. Dr. Marlene speaks to the heart of people who need to be lifted up and get out of the muck and mire that often accompanies major life changes, such as divorce or separation. Dr. Marlene will aspire to help parents of divorce to love their children more than they hate their ex, and to learn to take the high road. So please welcome the host of The High Road, Dr. Marlene.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. Welcome, George.
Thank you, Dr. Marlene. Always great to be with you, and good morning in our time zone anyway.
Yes, that's right. So we are continuing our discussion of the best interest of the child statute. And I think every jurisdiction has something akin to our best interest of the child statute. I haven't researched it. Maybe I should have. But would you agree that every state, every jurisdiction within a state has something similar to the best interest of the child?
Absolutely, yes. And I think that's pretty much almost a universal standard.
It is anymore, which is actually really refreshing. I'm glad that we prioritize the needs of the children, because sometimes, in a court of law, we're not necessarily thinking about things like kids' needs. But we need to in domestic relations cases, of course. And so it's heartwarming to see that most places are adopting or have adopted, I think a long time ago, adopted something similar to what we use. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and I think it's true and unfortunate that people have to go there to litigate the best interests of the child, because in a courtroom, we as lawyers are going to try to vilify the other party.
Mm-hmm.
And that's too bad, but that's the adversarial system.
Yes, it is. And it is sad, it is too bad, but again, at least the courts have adopted something like the best interest of the child. And that's what they're looking at, or hopefully looking at, is what they're supposed to be looking at.
Well, that's true, and the parents don't always agree on what is in the best interest of the child, and that's when they end up in court if they can't otherwise find a mediated way to resolve what is in the best interest of their child or children. Then we end up in a courtroom, and parents don't litigate their way to a healthy co-parenting relationship.
No, they don't. No, they don't. I love that because it's so true. And I think we forget that. And, our first go to is I'll have my attorney take care of it. And that's great. But usually what that means is you end up back in court. And so, sometimes people mediate or just negotiate between the attorneys. But often when they're really dug in, that's going to mean going back to court.
That's true, and it tends to be self-perpetuating, the anger and the frustration that people feel. I don't think it's the best way to deal with those feelings, but that's what we're left with if the parties are dug in, as you say.
Right, right. And then that, like you said, that further perpetuates the anger, because you go to court and somebody wins and somebody loses, and then they're even more angry. And so it doesn't solve anything. If anything, it perpetuates the hurt and anger and conflict.
Well, that's right, and the person who perceives themselves as having lost in court is often looking for some sort of retribution. So
Hmm.
it doesn't typically make things better as far as for the child is concerned. The
No.
litigation perpetuates the anger and the sense of self-justification, and so it becomes self-perpetuating, the anger and the frustration.
Yes. Yes. And they're not going to find a resolution to those things in court,
No.
unfortunately. No. So we covered roughly half of the items in the best interest of the child statute in Colorado. But we didn't get through all of them. And one that we barely scratched the surface on, and I wanted to talk about it a bit more. We talked about it some, but I think we need to probably place more importance or priority on this one, and that is the child's adjustment to his or her home, school, and community. And as we talked about last week, this is what we call social capital. That they've got friends at school, they've got teachers that they're familiar with, or a school counselor, or a counselor in private practice, or at a counseling center somewhere, or their church, or a ball team, or a scout troop, or a chess club, or something. But they're involved and ingrained, if you will, in their community. And I'm going to punt to you and let you talk about the importance of social capital and how much weight we should place on that.
Well, I think that's true, and children value their friendships, their school associations, extracurricular activities, and those things are important. If they're taken away from a child against his or her will, then where have we left that child in terms of emotions and where to go with those emotions? So it's very important. Uh, it comes up and becomes extremely important in a relocation case.
Yes, yes, especially in a relocation case. And this is often why relocation can be so difficult, is why would we want a child to leave the stability of all those things? Now, there might be other family members here, and that weighs also, or there might be other family members elsewhere. But often the presence of just a grandparent or just their cousins or something like that, and I don't mean to minimize or diminish the importance of those relationships, but I don't know that that often outweighs school and church and community and ball team and all those things I mentioned before.
Well, I think that's especially true for kids when they enter the teenage years.
Yes, yes. And that is really true. I mean, you want to make a teenage kid mad. Tell them that you're going to relocate right before their junior year of high school, or worse yet, their senior year. Most likely, they're going to find a friend to live with for that last year or two and stay put, because they aren't going to want to go where their parents go and make all new friends. And that's a lot to ask of kids once they've gone maybe all the way through school with the same set of friends. That's a lot to ask to go someplace where they know no one.
Well, and I think sometimes, unfortunately, if we take a child out of his or her familiar environment, which I think is another term for social capital, is
Mhm.
their environment that they're familiar with, then the question becomes, are they going to look for companionship with people that we would prefer they not look for companionship with?
Right, right. And that's a really, valid point of You don't know who your kids are going to hook up with and make friends with if you move to a different location. You just don't know. And wow, they're doing some work in my building and it all of a sudden got real loud. Um, anyway, hopefully that will not continue. At least it isn't the fire alarm right now. We had that going on earlier. But anyway, those are important considerations, you know, for the court. And it really does behoove parents to talk with their kids because some kids can transition well or easily to that kind of change. Others don't at all. And we have to kind of assess our kids. We have to know their temperament and their level of resiliency before we start moving them. And this can even be a move across town. That's not quite as drastic, of course, but it still is, something that is a change for the child after they've had all this other change. Mom and dad are no longer together, and one of them has moved to a different house, that kind of thing. And so the kids are dealing with enough change. And now, if you say, well, I'm going to change your school to this school across town, and you won't know anyone, or if they're lucky, they will have met, one person somewhere else, maybe in a scout troop or something. But those groups tend to be kind of area specific too, that you'll have a scout troop in a certain area. Same with churches and things like that. Most of us don't attend church clear across town from where we live. We find something close by. And so when you start moving things for a child, it might necessitate that now they have a new ball team or a new dance class or whatever it may be. And that's hard on kids. I mean, enough change is enough.
Well, and I think parents have to realize that one of the criterion in the best interest statute is their ability to prioritize the needs of the child over their own needs. And
Yeah.
we do that for our children anyway. We make sacrifices for our children. So it's really just a continuation of that concept. And, but it becomes critical in the decision of the court.
Yes. Yes, it does. And I'm glad that you brought that item up because we talked about that last week. And as you know, that's, to me, their ability to place the needs of the children above their own and the ability to foster the sharing of love, affection, and contact between the child and the other parent should be number one and number two in my mind.
Well, we really need to educate our clients and the parents about the criteria that the court is going to employ. And I
Mm-hmm.
think oftentimes they're surprised by that. They think that the court's going to look at what they want and why they want it, and that's it. And that's not the case at all.
Right, right. And so, yeah, it's an honest conversation that we need to have with our clients, and that our clients, or in my case, myself, needs to have with the kids. I often do that. I know you do not in your role, but we really have to talk to them about what that's going to look like. And there's kids out there that welcome that. They don't mind change. And they say, yeah, I'd like to make some new friends. I'm kind of sick of the ones I've got or whatever. But most don't want to leave everything that's familiar, or they think it sounds okay, but they don't realize once they get there, you're not going back. It's not like, oh, I'll still have those friends next week, but for this week, I'm going to go make new friends. No, this is permanent. And so I think we underestimate the impact that has on our kids.
Well, and I wonder when and if it's ever appropriate for the parents to discuss with the children what's going on and what the impact of what's going on in separation or divorce is going to have on them. Is that ever appropriate, and how do parents approach that discussion?
I think it is appropriate if done right. And that's the key, is if done right. And when it's done poorly, it's done in a way that kind of alienates the child from the other parent. And also, like, well, I would move and we could have these new experiences and be in the same town as grandma and grandpa, but your mom or your dad won't let us go. Then no, you don't want to have that kind of discussion, but you might be surprised how your kids feel, because they might say, I love grandma and grandpa. But like I was saying earlier, their friends, their sports teams, their school, their church, those things are going to outweigh, no offense, but they're going to outweigh grandma and grandpa. They just are.
Well, I think grandparents again can be um, a tremendous asset
Hmm.
to children, or they can be a detriment because they are invested in their own child, the adult parent of another child, and they want to take sides like that. So oftentimes, grandparents, I think they want to be supportive, but they're actually inflammatory.
Right, right. Yes. And often, when we're talking about is it appropriate and how it's done, because like I said, it's appropriate if done right. But often what happens too is parents don't have to say anything bad about the other parent. Their family, their extended family, their parents or their siblings or whoever will do it for them. And this is where we have to be careful. Have the discussion with your child. If you can have it between you and your child and uphold the other parent in the process. But you get parents who are hell bent on leaving, on relocating. And so now they're going to pull out all the stops to make the other parent look bad, um, to utilize other people like extended family members, people like that. And that's not appropriate. It's not. We need to listen to kids, not tell them how they feel. And that's what I see most is parents who want to tell the kids how they feel, or the child knows there's a right answer with this parent. And it's like, no, just ask the question openly and honestly and let them answer openly and honestly, not the way they think you want them to answer. And kids are very adept at knowing how their parents want them to answer.
Well, it in court, we're going to use the intensity with which the opposing party wants to have control over the
Hmm.
children as an inability to place the needs of the child ahead of their own needs,
Hmm.
an inability to encourage the sharing of love, affection, and contact with the other parent. We're going to use all of that to try to show that that parent is inappropriate to be a majority time parent or to get what they want. So the more intense they are in their desire, the more we're going to use that to show that they're incapable of performing the criteria under the statute.
Yes, you absolutely are. It's your job, but you are going to do that. And to that point, I'll talk about this when we come back. But there's certain things to that point that parents might want to avoid if they don't want to look bad in court. But let's first take a quick break. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. We'll be right back.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to EasySense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's EasySense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
Welcome back. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. Before we went to break, we were talking about things parents don't want to do if they're going to be scrutinized in court. Let's put it that way. And what I was getting at there is I am amazed at the things I see in text messages, emails, the apps that we use, such as Talking Parents and Our Family Wizard, Civil Communicator, any of those apps for co-parents. Parents put things in there that do not look good. And then, like you said, the other attorney is going to seize upon that and use that to show the court. And if you've made some really nasty statements, the court is going to question whether you should be a majority time parent or not. And yet I see parents do it all the time. Do you want to speak to that and what a heyday you have when you find that type of evidence against the other party?
Well, we're thrilled because we're going to try to vilify that other parent. And so the more adamant they are, the more we're going to try to vilify them by saying they're focused on their own needs and their own priorities and ignoring or to the detriment of the child. And so we would do better with a parent who came into court and said, you know, that's not my preference, my first preference for the arrangement. But if that's going to benefit my child, then I'm going to support that. Now, that's a parent that a judge is going to get behind, I think.
Yes, yes. I will totally agree. Totally agree. And it just amazes me how much parents, when they know they're being watched and they know they're being scrutinized, will say things that, it's just like, you really put that in writing. But they do, and you're right. They are definitely, a judge is definitely going to get behind a parent who shows that they can place the needs of the child above their own, that they can prioritize the relationship between the child and the other parent, all those things. And somebody pointed out something to me the other day, and it really is true, and it's worth repeating, that even intact families have these kind of dynamics. And I see it too all the time. I don't work with that many intact families, but what I see is a history, a pattern of this type of behavior, that it didn't start when they separated. But even when they were together, there's one who is verbally bullying the other. There's one who takes control of the children over the other, or plays kids against the other parent, things like that. And it's really quite eye opening.
Well, I think again, it refocuses us on the amount of hurt and frustration and anger that a parent going through divorce or separation often feels. And
Hmm.
so they need an outlet for that anger or a way to process that anger. And for my money, that's best done with mental health professional.
Well, it is. And that brings us to the next item on here. And that is the mental and physical health. This is what the court is looking at. The mental and physical health of all individuals involved, except that a disability alone cannot be used against a parent, or the wording is a disability alone shall not be a basis to deny or restrict parenting time. So if the parent can compensate for that disability, then it should not be factored in at all. But there is that item saying the mental and physical health of all individuals is taken into consideration. And yes, if you are consumed with anger, and you know how much you and I see people that are consumed with hurt or anger or whatever they're feeling, but those negative emotions, and yet they're not in counseling, or they have found counseling. I hate to say this, but they have found counseling with someone who will do nothing but prop them up in terms of their anger and not in a healthy way. I mean, they almost reinforce their victimhood. Like, yes, you were treated horribly. I had a long talk with a gal the other day about how a comment she made was not constructive and not useful. And the comment was, "I'm still your mother." And I said, "What useful purpose did that serve? Your teenage son knows that you are still his mother." And what she was getting at was stepmother had attended a school, because it was on dad's time, had attended a school meeting. It was for a sport. They were having a meeting, and she was there, and mother was there too. And they're actually all sitting in close proximity. But mom asked the kid if he had everything he needed for the sport. And he said, "Yes. And if I don't, we'll get it on the way home," meaning he and stepmom. And she turns around to him and only said it where he could hear, but that was all that mattered, was that he heard it. She said, "You know, I'm still your mother." And he said, "Yes, I know." Well, that's not going to serve a useful purpose. That's not going to make your son feel more warmly towards you, or, however you want to put that. It's going to make them a little resentful. And it did make him resentful, because that's how I found out about it, actually.
Well, here again, if we can focus the parent on loving their children more than they hate their ex,
Yes.
we can make progress in the various criteria in the best interest statute. But it's not easy,
No.
and people are angry and hurting, and we have to deal with that. And we really need to educate them that that anger and hurt, if it is displayed in the court, is actually going to be counterproductive to what their goals are for the representation.
Oh, yes, it is. And I think a point the parents need to take into consideration here in a scenario like what I described is, you can't have enough adults in your child's life who love them. And so Embrace that. If this stepmom is willing to accompany the kid to the meeting, to take the kid to the store on the way home and get the things that he doesn't have to participate in that particular sport, embrace that. I mean, maybe you're a little sad that you're not the one taking them, but I'm generally happy to have someone take my child to buy the things he needs, Not that I don't want to go, but why does that have to be a threat? And this is where a lot of parents are challenged, is they maybe can get over that other parent, not, them not being together, but they have trouble getting over the presence of a new step parent. And there's jealousy involved, there's competition involved. And like I said, I talked through this with her for quite some time the other day. But the question was, what useful purpose did that serve? None. It's showing that you're frustrated, that you're, I didn't use the word jealous, but a bit jealous that he's there with stepmom. But by gosh, like I said, you can't have enough adults in your child's life who love them. So embrace that, encourage that. I've shared this before, George, but my stepmom was the last parent I had. And for a number of years, for 10 years, no, it was more than that actually. I want to say 16 years before she passed. It was 16 years. I was grateful. And I think my parents up in heaven were probably happy that I had her too.
Well, to me, that speaks of the insecurity of the parent.
Mm-hmm.
And how are they going to deal with that?
Right.
And we don't want them dealing with that by making their child their emotional caretaker.
Right. Right. They are not. Children are not your emotional caretaker, and they're not here to make you feel good. They're kids. I mean, they have an egocentric point of view when they're still kids. I mean, even teenagers. I mean, you show me a 16 or 17-year-old that is not still terribly egocentric in their thinking, you know. And so, yeah. One other that I really want to discuss today, because it's tricky. This is tricky. And that is, the court will consider the past pattern of involvement of the parties with the child and whether or not their involvement reflects a system of values, time commitment, and mutual support. And I was talking earlier about often in intact families, one parent is more the caregiver of the children. And once you separate, you really have to encourage that contact and relationship with the other parent. But sometimes when the family is all still together, you have a parent who's not encouraging that, or they want to make sure that everyone knows that they come first. They're the number one parent, if you will. Well, where this gets tricky, and you tell me, I'm anxious to hear your perception of this, because I have a different view of things being a mental health professional than you as an attorney. But where it says the past pattern of involvement of the parents, you get that parent who says, I always did everything. I always took them to their appointments and activities. I did this, I did that. Okay. At this point, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's why I said I'm anxious to hear your perception. At this point, even if one parent worked 2 jobs and the other parent maybe stayed home or worked part-time so that they could provide for the children's needs, at this time, everything is changing. And we're going to give that parent who was never much involved the opportunity to step up and be involved and take them to appointments and activities. You're not going to find an order that says this parent will always be the one to take them to their doctor's appointments or their counseling appointments, or their ball games. In fact, if anything, they want parents, or this is the way I work anyway, is I have parents alternate in doing those things so that they aren't both present at a doctor's appointment. If you're a parent who's never gone to a doctor's appointment before, now that you're divorced and it's going to be uncomfortable and tense in that waiting room or the doctor's office to be there with the other parent, why would we do that now? But we will give the parent the opportunity, who was maybe never involved, the opportunity to step up and become an involved parent and be a vital part of their child's life and take them to appointments and activities. I'm going to turn it over to you. What's your perception of that?
Well, I would often ask a parent, and it was usually dad, uh,
Mhm.
are you an involved parent? And let me explain what that means. Did you, if it's a infant, did you change diapers? Were you involved in feeding? Did you take the child to pediatrician appointments? Or were you more hands off where you came home, you said hi, and then you went to the newspaper or the news on TV? Who traditionally was the parent who took children to appointments and so forth, if there is one parent. And roles are going to change to some extent. And that's what I
Mhm.
had to impress upon my clients was if you've been uh, passive in your parenting, you may need to become more active in your parenting now. Uh,
Mhm.
and so it is critical for the parents' performance in court anyway to understand the changing roles that both parents are going to go through, and if if they've been an uninvolved parent or a lesser involved parent, that they're going to have to step it up a little bit, and the other parent is going to have to relinquish a little bit of control.
Yes, that often becomes the challenge. It's one thing to get a parent to step up, and that can be a challenge too. They're just not used to it. They don't really know how to do it, or it's just not something they have done. And so they have to be kind of reminded and prodded to do certain things that they've never done. But I think the bigger challenge is getting that parent who has been the primary caregiver, getting them to let go, getting them to allow the other parent to have some of that um, caregiving and to play that role in their child's lives. Boy, they just often don't want to give that up.
I think that's true, and we have to break the tendency for those parents who have been the involved or primary caretaker. We have to help them to not helicopter parent, to
Mhm.
not overly be on the phone with the child when the child's with the other parent and so forth. So it's really it's difficult. It's a challenge because that parent has become secure in the role that they have occupied. And so
Mhm.
their world is being shaken as well, but they have to keep that focus on the child because as an
Yes.
adult, they have more ability to deal with that than a child does. And especially considering that social capital when a child enters teenage years.
Hmm. Hmm. And the parent almost sees the child as a possession and their role as an entitled role. And, they'll see this item and say, oh, I got that when I've been the parent who did everything. And it's like, well, you're going to have to step aside and let the other parent have an opportunity to do some of that.
I think if we can present that as an opportunity for
Yeah.
the parent who has been in control to have new adventures in life and to really fulfill their life in other ways, as well as being a parent, that's helpful if they can get their mind around that.
Yes, for sure. For sure. Well, it's time for another quick break. So, this is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. We'll be right back.
Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality, but it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating? Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like, it was almost instant. Like, I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. You know, it feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. Before we went to break, we were talking about parents letting go and letting the other parent step up. And I have one more point about this I want to make, because it is very difficult for many parents to do that. But probably one of the biggest challenges I see is they're expecting the parent who's always done it is expecting the other parent to do everything to their standard. And it does not have to be to their standard. And this is, I think, what I have seen as the biggest challenge is they want to be critical and judgmental. And they don't realize that in the courts, and I hate to say this, but there is a concept, it's unspoken, unwritten, but a concept of good enough parenting. And if a parent is a good enough parent, they're going to have time with their children. And so that parent who's never done a lot of these things before, they're going to step up and do them, but they may not do them the way the other parent wants them done. Now, I know you've seen that, George, and I'm going to let you comment on that.
Well, I think that's true. And so oftentimes a parent who expects the other parent to perform to his or her standards comes into the attorney's office and says they're not performing well enough. And so the attorney has to educate the client and say, you know, is it adequate? Is it good enough? Are they hurting the child? If the answer to those things are no, yes, it's good enough, it may not be great parenting, but it's adequate, then court is pretty much going to leave that alone.
Right. And how many times have you and I seen a court say something is not great parenting or maybe even bad parenting, but it does not rise to that level of endangerment? And short of rising to that level, the court is going to let people parent the way they're going to parent. I don't know legally that a court can dictate how people parent, you know.
No, I think one thing that bears mention is the apparent emphasis by the legislature in the statute on preventing domestic violence
Mm,
and the impact that that has on parenting. It's a whole new ball game if we have domestic violence involved in the case.
hmm. Yes, yes. No, I'm glad you did mention that because there is a new heightened emphasis placed on the presence of domestic violence and things like coercive control, things like that, that years ago weren't recognized in the courts as being domestic violence. And if people out there don't know what coercive control is, I encourage you to Google it, educate yourself, do some research and find out what that means and what all it entails, because there's a lot of it that goes on. And I would say to some extent, in every relationship, there's a certain amount of that type of thing going on. It may not be blatant and it may not even be conscientious, like the parent might not be conscientious of it or consciously aware that they are behaving in that way. But when you break it down and look at behaviors and interactions in relationships, there's often some level of, and I hate to call it manipulation, but persuading the other party that we should do this instead of that, that's relationship.
Yeah, I think that's true, and it does present a difficult case when there's been domestic violence involved on
Mhm,
either on the part of either or both parties.
mhm,
That's not uncommon where I've had cases where both parties have been involved in some level of domestic violence.
mhm.
So we really have our work cut out for us to try to reform those parents' behaviors, especially in terms of their children. That the
Yes.
damage that presents to the child is just tremendous, and they really don't have the skills or the tools to deal with it. To know it's just mom's hurting dad or dad's hurting mom, and it's very traumatic, I would imagine, for a child.
Yes, yes. And I want to emphasize something you said, that often what we see is mutual to some degree, mutual domestic violence. And it might be one party a lot more than the other, but often you will see that. And, one is very coercive and the other then lashes out and throws something or hits the other parent or something, pushes them or something. But they were antagonized, which doesn't make it okay. But at least the courts are now recognizing these things and acknowledging that there's a pattern of behavior that is not hitting or leaving a bruise on someone, but it is still equally internally damaging as when you do hit someone.
Yeah, I think even parents fighting can
Mhm,
traumatize a child,
mhm.
fighting verbally. And so if you add a physical component, I think as far as the fear and the anxiety that the child experiences, it's probably off the charts.
Yes, yes. And one thing I don't want to forget to mention again today, we talked about it last week. I can't emphasize this enough because I see this all the time. Those phone calls that parents want with the child when they're with the other parent, that is meeting the need of the parent. And you might think it's meeting the needs of your child. And to a degree, I'm sure it is. But a little bit of a phone call with the other parent goes a long way. Kids live in the moment. They are worried about who they're playing with right now, what they're playing, and especially if they are like playing interactive online games, video games, and things like that. Having to stop to come get on the phone with a parent is super annoying. And I'm telling you that because I hear it from your kids every day. And parents just don't get it. And they think the other parent is not allowing the child to talk to them or somehow preventing the child from talking to them. And I'm like, no, I guarantee you, your child does not want to stop doing what they're doing, stop playing, or whatever they're doing, and get on the phone with you and hang on the phone for a long time. And that's another thing. Phone calls should be roughly 1 minute per year of age of the child, roughly. And so if you've got a 5-year-old and you're trying to keep him on the phone 15 minutes, good luck with that. That's not going to happen.
So a phone call with you should be about 25 minutes.
Right. Yes, thank you. But, that's one that I know I bring up a lot about the phone calls. But it is just such a pet peeve of mine because the kids could care less. And parents are just so certain that it's somehow damaging the child that they don't get to talk to them and hang on the phone for a half hour. And it's like, that is meeting no one's need but your own.
Yeah, that's true. And telephone protocols are something that can be put into a parenting plan. I
Yes.
think that's a real good idea typically.
Yes, I do too. The length of time, who will call who, that type of thing. Yes, good point. Good point. All right. Well, we are about at the end of another hour. Thank you, George, for doing this with me.
My pleasure, Dr. Marlene. Always stimulating. I always learn from it.
Oh, thank you. Well, we learn from you, so thank you. All right, that does it for this week. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you've been watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. We'll see you next week.
Tune in to The High Road with host Dr. Marlene and gain insight into how to rise above tough circumstances and learn the skills that will help you take the high road in your life, no matter what challenges might come your way, on the next episode of The High Road.